one of the terms I love of yours, I think it was an essay for First Things a couple of years ago, normophobia. So
normophobia.
One way of thinking about it might be that the revolution that Ockham is part of, the revolution that he's unleashing, is against broadly a picture where there's a sort of, you can think of reality as ordered, and you can think of it as being populated by things with essences that are what they are just in virtue of being what they are. And that the Ockham revolution, as it were, introduces this idea that no, they're not.
No, none of that is
they're not
actually
what
real.
they are because they exemplify Platonic forms or divine ideas. They are what they are because we say they are what
That's
they
right.
are. And we're imposing nomina, that is to say names and labels.
That's right.
And it's up to us to, as it were, construct reality. Reality is something that we don't discover, but that we invent.
That's
and
right.
you
That's
effectively
right.
found your way to that
That's
without
right.
having to read any of those dusty medieval philosophy books.
Well, I got there in the end. I think I said to you the other day, having finally got there, it was a bit like having done DIY for years with 2 rusty spoons and half a brick, and then realizing that you can actually buy screwdrivers and pliers and spanners and things, and suddenly it's a lot easier.
You have to dust them down a bit.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You're very good at that.
Yeah, right. Well, you scrape off the rust. But yeah, but I mean, all of this is a very roundabout way of answering your question. You know, what is Harringtonism? It's and I think probably the most succinct answer I can give is that the missing piece, the missing flavour in the metaphysical bolognese is the piece that William of Ockham deleted all the way back in the 14th century, which is the idea that it's possible that there are kinds of reality that are not tangible. There are aspects to reality which are real, both real and also not sense perceptible. I think is that broadly accurate?
I think that is accurate. Absolutely
and
accurate.
That in turn led me, I think, with the help of your offices, partly, to go rummaging around and say, okay, well, how actually were people thinking about things before? And which sort of led me back to Thomas Aquinas, and thence very swiftly to Aristotle, who's the OG. With all of this, and at which point I discovered that actually what I'd been looking for, the missing flavors. There's 2 missing flavors, not one. It's not just garlic; it's also salt. I mean, imagine a bolognese without garlic and salt. Foul. The missing garlic and the missing salt are 2 of Aristotle's 4 philosophical 2 causes of everything. Aristotle's picture of reality is not just that a thing that things are made of stuff. And things have immediate proximate causes, like the billiard ball hits another billiard ball, and both the billiard balls are made of stuff. This is as far as your average, the accepted normie picture of reality today is concerned. That's just the entirety. That's it. That's your lot. And maybe the billiard balls are made of atoms, and maybe they're all ricocheting off one another, and so on, sort of down to quantum, which is weird, and we just don't go there.
If you take the bust of Sir Roger Scruton up on the mantelpiece, and Aristotle would say you have to explain that bust in at least 4 ways.
Exactly.
And if all those 4 pieces of the jigsaw are not in place, then you're not going to understand it.
That's right.
There's the stuff out of which it's made of. There's the efficient cause, the process in the factory that leads to the bust, as it were, coming off the conveyor belt. But there's also the form.
Exactly.
That is to say, the blueprint in the mind of the person who designed it.
Why is it shaped like Roger Scruton?
Exactly. It's not just an accident. There's a blueprint and for Aristotle,
and then that's what it's for.
And then that's what it's for. Why was he doing it? Oh, well, he liked Sir Roger, or he needed the money, or something. So there's got to be some sort of purpose and explanation. So those are the 2 missing pieces. That
exactly. But then there's but then there's also if you're talking about a bust, that's something humans have made. So in a sense,
it's an artifact, and
exactly,
it's a way of exactly. But Aristotle thinks that's actually natural. Nature is carved at the joints, and you can say this of acorns.
We're probably getting excited and going too fast at this point.
Acorns were always meant to be an oak
exactly.
tree, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, most people grasp this intuitively. If you point, I've while I was scratching around with my 2 rusty spoons and half a brick, I found myself often resorting to chickens as a way of explaining this to people. Because most people will grasp without getting too sort of tangled up in metaphysics that chickens have a nature. It's not a very complicated nature. Chicken's chicken, and it pretty much doesn't matter a whole lot how you treat them; they will still chicken. And if you hatch, and anybody who's ever raised chickens from an egg will know,
as you do,
as we do sometimes, will know that boy chickens and girl chickens chicken slightly differently. And that's not about parenting. It really isn't. You can hatch them under a heat lamp, and boy chickens will still chicken differently to girl chickens, very noticeably. To the point, we had a horrible one who used to chase us around the garden and try and fly at us with his spurs out. Very, very unpleasant character.
And yet somehow this crazy idea emerges in early modernity that no, there's nothing that it's like to be a chicken.
Exactly, there's nothing that it's like to be a chicken, and exactly, these are simply atoms arranged chicken-wise. And this, and they could be doing something else altogether, and there's just nothing else really to say about it. And there are tremendous upsides to thinking about the world like that from a sort of instrumental point of view. Downstream of draining the purpose and the meaning and the purpose out of the world, it opens up it gives you permission, in a sense, to take things apart and understand how they work, to vivisect animals. It gives you to strip mine mountains, to reorder the world using the force of your technology and your mechanistic understanding.
You've often cited Heidegger in this context, his famous essay concerning the question concerning technology, 1954, and this idea that that modernity, what the hallmark of modernity is that we just see things as stuff.
Yep, see things as stuff.
Standing reserve that we can simply draw on, manipulate, exploit.
And I sort of glommed onto Heidegger and the question concerning technology as on my, as it was better than the rusty spoon, by many orders of magnitude.
But one thing you see, which I think Heidegger doesn't, is that, and maybe this is just something that Heidegger it was just not happening until the 1960s, that we're starting to think of human nature itself as somehow I think part of the standing reserve.
This is the inflection point that I think arrives with the birth control pill. And Heidegger, I think the question is that's 1950, I think.
54.
So it's 50. Okay, so when that was just prior to. So for Heidegger, he's really talking about this as a relation between people and the external, the world beyond us. And really it's in the early 1960s, so not long after that essay was published, that the first large scale application of that mindset to ourselves.
Yeah, he was often accused. I mean, one of the only comments he ever made about his affiliation with the Nazi Party, the only criticism he was ever on record as saying, was that the problem with the Nazis and the concentration camps was that they were too technological. Now, people are sort of horrified at that comment, but anyone who's read that essay will understand the sort of, the moral force of that. What he meant was that we're just turning human nature into something that is just stuff with this awful kind of disregard.
I think this is that particular nightmare application of the spirit of technicity to humans is an acutely sensitive topic to get into. But I think the only at all contemporary writer I can think of who explores that at all is Paul Virilio, who writes about the concentration camps as through the lens of the application of technology there, the application of the mechanization of human bodies and the absolute atrocity that is. And it has always seemed to me that in our historiography of that period and those terrible things, that we focus, not correctly on the demagogic, the sort of the abuse of national,
the diabolical demagoguery of the 30s and so on, without paying attention to the technological presumptions.
There's a sort of fixation on national identity as being somehow the driver of all of this, which is in some degree true, that you can whip up those feelings such as to encourage people to dehumanize the other, and that sets off these horrendous dynamics and drives, and has subsequent to 1945 driven later genocides. This is well understood. And yet there's a piece which I feel somehow got lost by the wayside, which was about the industrialization of humans. That this was really the first time that was attempted at scale. This sort of factory eradication of an entire people. But some people grasp the horror of doing that to a people and somehow look away from the factory aspect of it. And I think the reason we look away from it is because it's now we learn too much from it and have been applying it very enthusiastically since. in too many different ways, and nobody really wants to touch that because we're so complicit, actually. And I mean, this is and Virilio is the only writer I can think of in Crepuscular Dawn who goes anywhere near this territory. Just how much of modern bioscience is the direct progeny of Nazi science during the war.